After 7 years, pouring your life into building something from the ground up, watching it grow from a messy sketch into the literal backbone of a multi-million-dollar international deal, it's hard not to feel a bit possessive. My name is Lena, and for nearly a decade, I lived and breathed a system I called Catalyst. It wasn't flashy, no fancy UI that would wow a keynote audience, but it was powerful. Catalyst was a multi-layered KPI infrastructure, a complex beast that started as a band-aid for regional branches and somehow evolved into the silent, ruthlessly efficient engine behind a $45 million global logistics contract. I built it. Every core module, every predictive algorithm, every dynamic alert that could sniff out a problem miles before it hit. My fingerprints were all over its digital DNA, and I wasn't just some coder hiding in a dark room. I was out there. I presented Catalyst at internal strategy sessions, trained whole departments on its intricacies, and yes, I was the one patching code at 3 a.m. when a deployment went sideways. My work didn't just support the company, I genuinely believed it was shaping its future. Then, our old CEO, a decent guy who understood the nuts and bolts, retired. I was cautiously optimistic about his replacement, Marcus Thorne. The man had a reputation. Harvard, a couple of TED Talks, a smile that could sell ice to an Eskimo. He loved buzzwords like synergy and disruption, using them with a completely straight face. I'd done my homework, not much of a tech background. That wasn't unusual. What set my internal alarms ringing wasn't his lack of tech knowledge, but how quickly he'd dismiss anything he didn't immediately grasp. Still, I believed in logic, in process, in data. So, when I scheduled a meeting to discuss a raise and a formal promotion, something the previous leadership had all but promised, I came armed. A sleek presentation, ROI metrics from the last 8 quarters, a clear roadmap for Catalyst's next evolution. Marcus greeted me with that toothpaste commercial smile. "Lena, always a pleasure. Heard amazing things about your work?" I smiled back, keeping it professional. "Then I hope you understand why I think it's time we discuss the scope of my role and align it with compensation." He nodded, like he was already 3 chess moves ahead. "Of course. Let's dive in." For 20 minutes, I laid it all out. Growth in system efficiency, measurable client retention directly tied to my modules, the early warning features that had single-handedly prevented 3 major delivery meltdowns. He nodded, jotted down a note or two. When I finished, he leaned back, lacing his fingers together. "Lena, what you've done is really impressive." A beat of silence. I felt the "but" coming before it even left his lips. The timing just isn't right. We're in the midst of a significant organizational restructuring. Leadership roles are being evaluated holistically. It's not about your performance, it's about the process. Process. That word, once a source of clarity for me, now felt like a smokescreen. "So, is this a delay or a decision?" I asked, my voice steady. "It's a realignment," he replied, as if that explained anything. "We appreciate your work deeply, truly. But right now the focus is on flexibility, agility, fresh perspectives." I nodded slowly, a practiced calm I'd perfected over years of corporate meetings. "Understood." But I didn't. Not really. I left his office with a carefully neutral expression, a Category 5 hurricane raging just beneath my ribs. I'd made my case, backed it with undeniable data, delivered it without ego, and still, it was dismissed with a "not now." Except it didn't feel like "not now." It felt like "not you." Walking past the glossy campaign posters lining the hallway. Diversity, innovation, empowerment. The irony was a bitter pill. I'd empowered a system that empowered profits. But who was there to empower me? Back at my desk, the blinking cursor on my terminal seemed to mock me. "It's not about you." But what if it was? The email landed at 7:12 a.m. Subject: Reorganization. Briefing, 9 a.m., Conference Room D. No details, no names, just a bland calendar block dropped into my morning like an unexploded ordnance. Too early for surprises, too vague for peace of mind. I arrived a few minutes early. The room was already set. 2 bottled waters, 1 projector, and Marcus Thorne himself, standing by the window, arms crossed, attempting a deep thoughts pose. Next to him was Kate from HR, whose smile was stretched a little too tight. "Lena," Marcus said, his warmth feeling rehearsed. "Thanks for making time." "I assume this is about the system transition?" I asked, still trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. "Maybe a workflow adjustment, a reallocation of resources. Something logical." Marcus glanced at Kate. She gave a polite, almost imperceptible nod before pulling out a folder. "We'll get right to it," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "As part of our structural review, we're streamlining key leadership roles to better align with evolving strategy." And then Marcus said it. "Effective immediately, you'll be transitioning into an advisory role." My heart felt like it dropped into my shoes. "Advisory? You'll retain your salary and title for now," Kate interjected quickly. "But moving forward, decisions and execution for Catalyst will be overseen by a new lead." I blinked. "A new lead? Who?" Marcus beamed that blindingly bright smile again, the one that always felt 1 watt too intense. "Chloe Vance. We believe she represents the kind of innovative thinking this company needs." Chloe. Chloe Vance? The same Chloe who once, in all seriousness, asked me what a load balancer did. The same Chloe who'd airily dismissed Catalyst's architecture as just a bunch of charts? The Chloe who had, on one memorable occasion, crashed a critical test server because she thought a staging environment was optional? I stared at them, stunned. My voice was trapped in my throat, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew with chilling certainty it wouldn't matter. Not here, not now, not with Kate's pen already poised over the HR summary sheet. I nodded once. Understood. The meeting was over in less than 3 minutes. By the time I walked back to my desk, the announcement was already live on the company intranet. Chloe Vance appointed head of global KPI strategy. It was there, in bold. Chloe's leadership was instrumental in developing and scaling our current system. She'd been on the team for less than a year. She'd once asked me to explain our data model using emojis. Now, she was the face of my work. I scrolled past the corporate jargon. Visionary, agile thinker, forward momentum. Each word felt like a fresh paper cut. At the bottom of the post was a photo. Chloe, arms folded confidently, standing in front of a diagram I had drawn, a slide I had presented, a framework I had painstakingly defended. No mention of me. Not even a cursory "thank you" buried in the footer. I sat there for a long moment, hands resting on the keyboard, eyes dry but heavy. Around me, the office hummed with the familiar rhythm of any other morning. Keyboards clicking, phones buzzing, colleagues exchanging low-voiced greetings. No one looked my way. No one noticed the silent coup. They had demoted me and handed the crown to someone who hadn't even earned the right to look at the map. But I said nothing. Not yet. The auditorium was buzzing with that nervous, caffeinated energy that precedes a big company announcement. Rows of chairs filled with expectant faces. Management types floated near the front, all tailored blazers and serious expressions. The AV team scurried, testing microphones with cheerful urgency. I found a seat halfway down, third from the left, close enough to see, far enough to be invisible. The screen lit up with the company's new quarterly slogan, Vision, Velocity, Victory. I almost snorted. There was nothing visionary about recycled buzzwords, but the next slide hit harder. "Let's talk about innovation," Marcus Thorne declared, taking the stage. His voice, amplified by the lapel mic, boomed with polished confidence, like a man narrating his own glowing biography. As many of you know, our KPI infrastructure, Catalyst, has undergone a major transformation this year. Today, we're celebrating the mind behind that transformation, someone who's redefined how we think about performance forecasting and client insight. My pulse slowed in that awful, sickening way it does right before an impact. Please join me in congratulating Chloe Vance, lead architect of our revolutionary Catalyst system. Applause thundered around me. Chloe stood up from her seat in the aisle, beaming like a woman who genuinely believed every word. She adjusted her blazer, flicked her hair behind one shoulder, and walked to the front as if the red carpet had been rolled out just for her. The presentation began. Slide after slide flashed across the giant screen. Graphs I had built, logic flows I had designed, performance charts that had existed in my head for years before they ever graced a dashboard. I recognized every color-coded segment, every axis label, every predictive variance marker. They had changed nothing, except the name. Under Chloe's guidance, Marcus continued, his voice swelling with pride. We've optimized reporting latency by 22%, improved forecast accuracy, and positioned ourselves at the forefront of global operations. This is next-generation strategy. I stared at the glowing slide behind him, and then I saw it. Bottom right corner, barely visible, almost an afterthought, but unmistakable. File name, Lena, Catalyst, Arch V4 PPTX. My breath caught. They hadn't even bothered to rename the damn file. I was looking at my own work. My late nights, my meticulous calculations, my risk logic, all paraded as someone else's triumph. And the worst part? No one else in that room seemed to notice, or care. Around me, heads nodded. Phones lit up as people snapped photos of the graphs. I sat perfectly still, hands clasped in my lap, expression unreadable. Not because I wasn't feeling anything, but because I was feeling everything. I wasn't just being overlooked, I was being erased. Slide after slide, metric after metric, every visual a monument to what I had created, presented without acknowledgement, without credit, without history. My name, reduced to a piece of metadata in a corner no one was supposed to see. But I saw it, and I wouldn't forget it. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. I didn't jump up during the applause and scream, "That's mine!" No. I sat there quietly, letting the silence do what it always had, keep me grounded. When the meeting ended and the crowd filtered out in a haze of catered coffee and congratulatory chatter, I returned to my desk. Not out of loyalty, out of instinct. My computer screen lit up with the familiar glow of the Catalyst interface, the one I'd built, line by line, parameter by parameter. I logged in, my eyes scanning code and architecture like reading a sigh, secret language no one else could decipher. My fingers hovered above the keys, not typing, just remembering. 3 years ago, when our old infrastructure had started to creak under the weight of its own inefficiency, I'd pitched the solution. A new, powerful back-end framework called Keystone. It could support real-time KPIs at scale, stabilize forecasting models, and drastically reduce system latency. The finance team blanched at the cost. Leadership said it was a nice idea, maybe later. But Catalyst, even in its earlier form, was weeks away from a critical deployment for a major client, and the old system was on the verge of collapse. I couldn't let it fail. So I bought the Keystone Enterprise Developer license myself. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I wanted to be a martyr, but because I couldn't afford the bureaucratic delays. I fronted the cost, registered the license, in my name, Lena M. Valerius, and installed the base framework on a quiet Saturday while the building sat empty and the servers hummed their obedient song. I had almost forgotten about that. Almost. Until now. I opened the license panel within the system, and there it was, Keystone Enterprise Developer License. Registered owner, Lena M. Valerius. Status, active. Auto-renews, March 2026. 3 years later, the entire company, Chloe's revolutionary system, the dashboards Marcus praised, the forecasts. They sold to investors. It all still ran on my license. My signature. My digital spine. They had erased me from the leadership roster, cut me out of strategy meetings, paraded my work under someone else's name. But they hadn't touched the bones. They couldn't, because the foundation didn't belong to them. It belonged to me. I sat back, the screen glowing in the dim light of the early afternoon. Around me, the office buzzed. Emails, Slack pings, talk of celebratory lunch plans for Chloe. No one noticed what I was doing. No one thought to look. They had pushed me out of the story, but they forgot the most important rule about systems. The story doesn't end at the surface. It runs in the code, and the code was still mine. I didn't rush. That's not how complex systems unravel. Destruction is easy. Anyone can yank cables, delete files, corrupt databases. But subtle recalibration? That's an art. The next morning, I came in early, even for me. The office was still, lights dim, just the cleaning crew whispering on another floor and the low hum of machines waking up. I sat at my terminal, sipped my coffee, and opened the code. Not Chloe's superficial layer. Mine, the original. The bones. I started with the indicator logic. It was robust, designed to flag even subtle inconsistencies in lead conversions, customer, churn, and supply volatility. Now, I rewrote the weighting. Gently, subtly. Instead of pulling from 7 key variables, I trimmed it to 4. Instead of rewarding balance and healthy long-term metrics, I biased it towards flash, volume surges, API traffic bursts, short-term engagement spikes. The result? Everything would look beautiful, inflated, gleaming, but fundamentally flawed. The forecasts would now drift, maybe 10%, 12% over time, enough to sow quiet chaos, but not enough to spark immediate glaring suspicion. Not yet. Then I moved to the alert layer. Originally, Catalyst's alert framework was surgical. It caught system anomalies before humans even knew there was a problem. Now I carefully neutered it. I disabled 2 major triggers, error propagation and performance lag, and rewrote their callbacks to push soft, ambiguous messages. Review pending instead of critical alert. I replaced urgency with bland compliance. The system wouldn't scream danger anymore. It would just quietly, misleadingly smile. By noon, I had tested the new build in a mirrored environment. Every graph looked immaculate. Client growth charts showed a steady upward climb. Conversion ratios glittered. Forecast reliability sat at a smug 97.8%, and none of it was real. It was the illusion of control, dressed up in dashboards and PowerPoint slides, a cathedral of numbers built on hollow foundations. I didn't touch the production environment. Not yet. I waited, observed, prepared. Sabotage was never the goal. I wasn't trying to burn anything down. I wanted them to worship a beautifully crafted lie. So when it finally cracked, and it would crack, they'd have no idea where the rot began. They'd search logs, blame servers, question vendor updates. But they'd never suspect that the flaw was woven into the very fabric of its perceived perfection. And they'd never think to ask the one person who knew every secret layer of the code. Because to them, I was just the advisor now. A relic. A shadow. But shadows see everything. The auditorium was packed again, this time for the Q3 review. Laughter floated over the rows of chairs like champagne bubbles. People wore their best business casual smiles. The energy was sharp with success. Record-breaking quarter, someone whispered near me. Chloe's team is killing it, came another voice, full of admiration and blissful ignorance. The lights dimmed. The projector glowed. Chloe Vance stepped onto the stage, back straight, heels precise, face framed by carefully styled hair. She was dressed in power navy and confidence. The crowd leaned in like a congregation awaiting scripture. Behind her, the screen exploded with metrics. That's 19.3% client retention. 22% efficiency gains. Forecast accuracy, 97.8%. It was immaculate, flawless, beautiful, and entirely false. I watched from my usual spot in the middle row, eyes steady, mouth neutral. Applause thundered around me as Chloe clicked through slide after slide of triumphant success. All of it generated by a system that no longer warned about late shipments, inventory discrepancies, or critical risk variance. Because I had turned those alarms off. They weren't seeing success. They were seeing silence. They clapped for graphs that had been polished to a deceptive shine but were rooted in misinformation. Behind the curtain of these beautiful numbers, the drift was already beginning. Minor delivery delays, misaligned projections, unsynced dashboards. Not chaos, not yet. But it was coming, like a hairline crack in glass that no one notices until it shatters under the slightest pressure. Marcus Thorne, the CEO, took the stage next. Let's give another round of applause to Chloe Vance for her extraordinary leadership in transforming our performance systems. More clapping. Some people even stood. I didn't. Marcus continued, smiling like a man who thought he'd conquered the world. What we're seeing now is just the beginning. This quarter's profitability has surged beyond all expectations. And the best part? No major issues. Not a single escalation in 3 months. That's what I call bulletproof strategy. I almost laughed. Of course there were no escalations. The system couldn't report them anymore. It was like bragging your house never caught fire right after you disabled all the smoke detectors. As the presentation wrapped, I slipped away quietly. Not because I couldn't stomach the applause, but because I had something else to confirm. For weeks, a suspicion had been crawling at the back of my mind. Chloe's meteoric promotion, her rapid rise, the casual confidence with which she'd taken credit for work she clearly didn't understand. It didn't add up, until now. A hushed conversation overheard in the break room, a careless mention from someone in finance, and one late-night search through old server logs and meeting itineraries. It turned out Marcus and Chloe had been traveling together far more than was typical or necessary for her role. Off-site strategy meetings in desirable locations, private leadership syncs. Then there was the almost immediate high-level security clearance she received, something that took others years to obtain. It painted a clear picture of unprofessional favoritism, a relationship that went well beyond mentorship. Chloe wasn't just the lead strategist. She was the CEO's special project, insulated by his influence. Suddenly, everything made sense. The unearned authority, the protected incompetence, the reason her ignorance had been reframed as fresh thinking. It was never truly about the system. It was about power and preference. And they thought they'd won. I returned to my desk and opened Catalyst. The dashboard glowed green, so calm, so confident. I knew better. The house was already on fire. They just couldn't hear the alarms. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon. The office buzzed with its usual rhythm, muted calls, the clack of keyboards, a sales team laughing a bit too loudly by the elevators. I sat at my desk, invisible in plain sight, reviewing logs from the predictive engine. My engine, though no one called it that anymore. Then came the ping. A message request on my private LinkedIn from someone who, technically, shouldn't have been contacting me directly. Priya Sharma, VP of Operations at Northbridge Health, one of our biggest clients. We had worked closely for years. I still remembered her straightforward style, her meticulous feedback, and how she once called Catalyst a crystal ball with teeth. Her message was short, precise, Hi, Lena. I know you're technically not the point of contact anymore, but something's wrong. The system feels off. Lagged alerts. Data drift. This doesn't look like your work. Are you still involved at a deep level? My breath caught. They noticed. She noticed. I didn't reply. Not yet. I couldn't. Not without risking more than just awkward questions. But the moment I saw her words, I knew what was coming. The illusion was cracking. A week later, it happened. The company-wide email came mid-morning, sent from the legal department, stamped with urgency and corporate regret. Subject: Client account status. Northbridge Health. The message was formal. Sterile. Effective immediately, Northbridge Health is suspending their analytics contract with us. Renewal for Q4 has been canceled. That contract? Worth just under $8 million. The office froze. Conversations stopped. People hovered around screens like spectators at a car crash. Whispers, confusion, low-voiced speculation. The system had shown, everything is fine. No alerts, no flags. Forecast showed 98% confidence just last week. But Northbridge's deliveries were late. Inventory mismatches were multiplying. Their forecast had failed them spectacularly. And just like that, trust evaporated. But here's the kicker. In the emergency war room meeting later that day, I watched from the back row as executives danced around the truth. Unexpected client behavior. Logistical misalignment. We'll audit the delivery pipeline. Marcus sat at the head of the table, jaw tight, eyes unreadable. Chloe sat beside him, flipping through a printout like a detached observer, nodding thoughtfully while others tried to explain the fallout she had, in her ignorance, helped create. Not a word of blame for her. Not a breath of accountability. The system was wrong, but their protective illusion around Chloe was still intact. For now. What they didn't understand was that Northbridge wasn't the problem. Northbridge was the beginning. The first crack in a facade built on my stolen foundation. And when the others came, and they would, there'd be no hiding. Because once trust is broken, it doesn't just collapse. It echoes. The consultant's name was David Sterling. Silver hair, expensive-looking glasses, a calm, authoritative voice. He arrived on a Monday with a sleek laptop, a leather notebook, and the unmistakable air of a man used to fixing things, to cleaning up other people's messes. System audit, back-end structure, predictive logic mapping, he said, shaking hands, in the glass-walled conference room. Shouldn't take more than a few days. That was before he opened the code. I watched from my desk, quietly tethered to the periphery of the escalating chaos. No one formally included me in the meetings. I was, after all, just an advisor. But the moment David Sterling began digging into Catalyst's core architecture, I could practically feel the friction from across the room. By the second day, his tone had audibly changed. I'm trying to trace the forecasting logic tree, he said to Chloe, standing in front of her monitor, his voice carrying clearly in the tense office. But there are hidden references I can't map. Functions within functions, layered modules without standard documentation. Chloe gave an exaggerated sigh. Yeah, Lena built it that way. She made it overly complicated. David Sterling raised an eyebrow. Or maybe, he said, his gaze fixed on the screen. She was just very thorough. Chloe blinked, unsure if it was a compliment or a correction. He scrolled again. This isn't messy. It's elegant. Obscure, yes, but deliberately so. You don't hide logic like this unless you're thinking 5 steps ahead. From across the room, I fought back a smile. It was mine. Every embedded sequence, every internal redundancy, every recursive function. They had erased my name, stripped my title, handed the crown to someone who couldn't even follow the footprints I'd left behind. But they still couldn't escape the truth. The system might have looked like Chloe's now, but it spoke in my language. I watched as David tilted his head at the screen, fingers pausing over the keys like someone trying to decipher a dialect no one had taught him. He didn't look frustrated. He looked intrigued. "This isn't a normal architecture," he muttered, more to himself than to Chloe. "It's defensive, predictive, almost alive." Chloe tried to steer him back to surface metrics, smiling too brightly, pretending she understood what any of it meant. But her discomfort showed in every fidget, every nervous glance toward Marcus's office, every forced nod. They had built their reputation on a castle of glass, and now the man they'd brought in to reinforce it couldn't even find the front door. And I sat quietly, because I didn't need to say a word. The code was already speaking for me. I'd never cared much for office gossip. My world had always been small, precise: code, system performance, client deliverables. Math made sense. People often did not. But now, I needed to understand the whispers, the undercurrents. It began with the travel receipts, little red flags buried deep in the finance department's folders. Chloe's name kept appearing alongside Marcus Thorne's: Executive Strategy Retreat, Bali, Leadership Sync, Aspen Lodge. Each one booked under different departmental codes, billed under vague project names, but always, curiously, just the two of them. Then came the calendar entries. Chloe, it turned out, had privileged access to Marcus's private calendar, not just the public-facing version. I caught a glimpse one afternoon when she forgot to lock her screen before rushing off. Back to back. Meetings in off-site locations, no other attendees listed. Review and alignment. Strategy pulse check. All conveniently titled, all devoid of any discernible agenda or output, all exclusively for Marcus and Chloe. Rumors started to solidify. Sarah from operations mentioned seeing them sharing overly familiar laughter in Marcus's car late one evening after an off-site coaching session. Dario in IT confirmed Chloe had been granted top-tier security clearance within her first 2 months, a level of access it took most others years of proven trust to earn. And then there was the photo, an Instagram story posted by a junior, sales rep from a company rooftop party, quickly deleted, but not before I saw it. Chloe, in a cocktail dress, laughing, Marcus behind her, his hand resting on her waist, a little too close, a little too proprietary for a CEO and his subordinate. I screenshotted it before it vanished into the digital ether. Just like that, the pieces clicked into place. Her inexplicable rise, her untouchable status, the reason no one dared question her often disastrous decisions, why Marcus defended her so fiercely even when clients started to pull their valuable contracts. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a clear abuse of power stemming from an inappropriate, unprofessional relationship. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't print the receipts or leak the photo. Not yet. But I archived everything, screenshots, logs, expense reports, into a little folder hidden deep on my personal drive, encrypted, titled Something Innocuous, Legacy Audit Q4, Let. Them keep clapping for their golden girl. Let her sit in meetings she didn't understand, regurgitating my work into buzzwords she barely grasped. I wasn't trying to expose her, not then. I was waiting for the moment when exposing the truth would matter most, because real accountability isn't loud. It's patient, and I had all the time in the world. The boardroom was colder than usual. A late autumn chill had crept in through the expansive glass panels, but no one mentioned it. They were too busy preparing for what was expected to be a victory lap, a reassurance after the North Bridge stumble. Chloe stood confidently at the front, flanked by a glossy presentation deck projected on the massive screen. Marcus sat nearby, legs crossed, smiling with the smug stillness of a man who believed the storm had passed. Let's dive into this quarter's success metrics, Chloe began, clicking to the first slide. Bar charts soared upward in vibrant shades of green and blue, each one more triumphant than the last. As you can see, client satisfaction is at an all-time high, Forecast accuracy remains above 97%. Then it happened. A soft gray line of text scrolled silently across the bottom of the screen. At first, it seemed like a formatting glitch, a stray bit of code. But the words were perfectly clear, chillingly precise. This data has been optimized. It is not real. Ask who changed the core. A sharp inhale echoed from the far side of the long mahogany table. Chloe froze, her hand still on the clicker. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes narrowing into slits. "What is that?" he muttered, his voice tight. The line didn't disappear. It repeated, smoothly, insistently. A director fumbled for his phone, an alert pinging. He opened his inbox. An automated message, seemingly from the Catalyst system itself, had just arrived in the inboxes of every board member. Same line, same stark font. "This data has been optimized. It is not real. Ask who changed the core. Is this a joke?" One board member demanded, turning sharply in his seat. "Is this some kind of system test?" Chloe stammered, clicking frantically at her remote. I don't know. It must be a formatting error. Some legacy code from an old dev environment, maybe? Legacy? Code? Another director snapped, his patience clearly gone. "You've been presenting this architecture as your creation for months, Ms. Vance." David Sterling, the consultant, stood slowly from his seat near the back of the room. All eyes turned to him. "That message," he said, his voice calm but carrying undeniable weight, "isn't a bug. It's embedded. Triggered specifically and only during executive-level presentations using this dataset. Someone left it deep in the system. Intentionally." Marcus shot up from his chair. "Can we scrub it? Disable it?" David Sterling shook his head. "No. It appears to be tied directly to the core display logic. You'd need the original architect to untangle this cleanly. Someone who knows it intimately." Silence. A heavy, uncomfortable silence. And then, from Martin Cross, the sharp-eyed director in the impeccably tailored cream suit, the question that hung in the air: who is Lena Valerius, and why isn't she in this room? The room, as one, turned its collective gaze first toward Marcus, then to a rapidly paling Chloe. Neither spoke, because suddenly the truth was too loud to ignore. My name, the one they had tried so hard to erase, had just punched through the silence. Not in anger, not in noise, in code, in undeniable, elegantly delivered proof that beneath every shiny graph and inflated number, there was a ghost in the machine, and her name was Lena. They summoned me via a rushed email from Director Cross's office. Urgent in all caps. No pleasantries, no pretense, just, "Please report to the 11th floor main conference room immediately." I knew the moment had arrived. When I walked in, the air was thick with a mixture of hostility and grudging curiosity. Chloe sat stiffly at one end of the table, her polished demeanor cracking under a sheen of nervous sweat. Marcus stood off to the side, jaw clenched, arms crossed, radiating impotent fury. Around the table, board members stared at me as if I were the final, unwelcome piece of a puzzle they hadn't wanted to solve. Mr. Cross gestured to an empty chair. "Ms. Valerius," he began, his voice clipped but respectful. "We would appreciate your clarity on the current system integrity concerns." I nodded, calm, controlled. I opened my laptop, connected it to the main display, and projected a live interface of the Catalyst system. The real system, not the manipulated version they'd been seeing. Then I walked them through it. Line by line, the reweighted variables, the reduced forecast inputs, the stripped-down early warning logic, the buried silenced alerts. "The system," I said, my voice even and clear, "was altered. Not to break it, but to make it lie convincingly. It was modified to favor cosmetic gains, to present an illusion of flawless performance. The data looks good because it was meticulously designed to hide what's actually going wrong." I paused, letting that sink in. "Forecasts have been off by 10 to 12% for weeks. That's why Northbridge Health pulled their contract. And unless the core logic is restored, more will follow. I clicked once more. Chloe Vance's changelog appeared on the screen. Time-stamped entries, her user credentials, the precise moments she had implemented edits based on superficial understanding, all without grasping their cascading impact on the system's accuracy. And the person who made these specific changes, these optimizations, I added, turning my gaze slightly towards a now ashen-faced Chloe, was Ms. Vance. Silence. Marcus opened his mouth, a protest forming, but he didn't get the chance. A voice, crisp and familiar, rose from the speakerphone on the conference table. Priya Sharma from Northbridge Health was on the line, evidently invited by Mr. Cross. "I just want to be clear for the record," Priya stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Our Q4 budget, previously allocated to your company for Catalyst services, is now being redirected. We are engaging Ms. Lena Valerius to lead our new independent analytics development initiative, effective immediately." There was a long, stunned pause. No one moved. No one clapped. This wasn't a celebration. It was an unraveling. I closed my laptop, unplugged the cable, and turned to leave. Then, I stopped, reached into my bag, and slid a single plain manila folder onto the polished table in front of Mr. Cross. "Before I go," I said quietly, "you should probably understand why Ms. Vance was given this position of authority in the first place, despite her evident lack of qualifications." Inside the folder were the meticulously organized travel receipts, the incriminating calendar entries, copies of internal communications showing undue influence, and that one rather telling photograph from the rooftop party. I didn't need to elaborate. The contents spoke for themselves. The board members leaned in. Chloe went from pale to ghostly. Marcus didn't even try to stop me. I walked out without looking back. No fanfare, no dramatic exit interview, no forced smiles. Just the quiet, satisfying click of a door closing behind me, and the heavy silence of a room finally, belatedly, realizing exactly who they had underestimated. The system was no longer theirs, and neither was I. 2 days later, I sat in a glass-walled office overlooking the city, not a borrowed desk in a dim corner of someone else's empire. Mine. The contract from Northbridge Health was already signed. They didn't just offer me a role, they offered me a future. Double the salary, full technical autonomy, no micromanagement, no middlemen, no interference. Just a team of sharp, curious people who wanted to learn, not to steal credit. And most importantly, respect. They didn't want me to simplify brilliance into buzzwords. They didn't want me to shrink to fit a title. They didn't even want me to justify my worth. They'd seen it. They knew. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to fight for my place at the table. I was building the table, and this time the system would carry my name at its very core. Not in a hidden file name, not buried in the metadata, not whispered in the background of someone else's flawed presentation, but in every layer of code, in every clean, honest, quietly powerful line. This wasn't just a promotion. It was a beginning. And it was, unequivocally, mine.